Well, it looks like we're kind of at a steady number right now. Thank you everybody for joining. This is a state partnership breakout, and our topic today is actually about leading an educational conference for PECs. And our speaker today is Jason Mahoney, who helped during the PEC Learning Collaborative back in, I think that was 2019 now, helped the Montana team with that collaborative. So Jason, I'm just gonna go ahead and hand it over to you. And after Jason's presentation, we'll have the lines will just be open. This isn't the webinar, this is the normal Zoom. So you can turn on videos, unmute yourselves, use the chat, whatever you'd like after Jason's presentation, and we can share experiences or ask questions. So thanks again, Jason, for joining, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I trust that you can see my slides. Is that true?
We can, yep.
Very good. All right, well, welcome everyone. Glad to have you all here with us today. My name, as she said, is Jason Mahoney. I do a bunch of different things. In the role that I'm in today, I'm the pediatric liaison to Montana's EMSC program. So I do a lot of education and training. I help with drills and all sorts of stuff in the pediatric world, both in hospitals and EMS around the state of Montana. I also am the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for Carbon County, Montana. I'm a nationally registered paramedic, and overall, most of the stuff I do kind of falls under my consulting company, and I contract out to do all the things I just mentioned. I was the lead for Montana's group during the PEC Learning Collaborative, which was the craziest 6 months I think I've ever worked my way through, at least before COVID. And we really learned a lot, so I'm happy to share a little bit of that experience with you. The picture there is an older one, my kind of professional one. Really, this is more me today. I've recently moved back from eastern Montana to the mountains of western Montana and grew the requisite beard, and love to get out and drive around in my Jeep to blow off some steam. So that's kind of me today, although not really today, because I'm coming to you from the National Healthcare Coalition Preparedness Conference down in Orlando. So not anywhere near the mountains, but it's been very cool. So just a little background on the PEC Learning Collaborative that led us to the PEC conferences that we held. This was a very, very quick 6-month collaborative trying to discover and develop best practices at the state level to increase the number of PECs within each of 9 states that you see listed there. We had some lofty goals, and not all of them were met, but you can see on the chart how many PECs we added as a 9-state collaborative in a very, very short time. So we shared a lot of ideas, and I'm glad to pass some of those along today. We always like to kind of refocus ourselves, and we were asked a lot through the PEC collaborative, why were PECs important to children in our state? Why were pediatric emergency care coordinators important? And we very simply said, it's because of the kids. And we like to just remind ourselves of that this is really why we do so much of the work that we do. A little background on Montana that we shared throughout the collaborative, and kind of might help understand why we broke things up the way that we did. We're the 4th largest state in the nation, almost 150,000 square miles, over 94 million acres, but only a population of a little over 1 million. So we are, as we'll see, quite rural overall. And statistically, we run right in that national average of near 25% of the population being under the age of 18. You can also see that if you flew as the crow flies from one corner to the other of Montana, you're about 629 miles, but travel and negotiating the geography of the state is very challenging sometimes. We can see here, just to give some more scope, that the size of Montana is impressive. It would be big enough to stretch from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, up into Maine. On the West Coast, it would stretch from San Diego to Los Angeles, up to San Francisco, all the way north to Sacramento, and still reach over and cover Vegas and Reno. So we are talking a large state, a large bunch of geography with not as many people. And as we'll see, not as much for medical resources as well. Just for fun, we looked at how rural we are and our population densities, et cetera. So the white counties that you see are the 10 out of the 56 counties within Montana that don't qualify as frontier. So the counties in white have 12 to 60 per square mile people, whereas the vast majority of the state in red has less than 6 people per square mile. However, looking as a state in general, each square mile averages 7 people, 2.5 cows, 1.4 antelope, 3.3 deer, and 1.4 elk. So another reason really why PECs are so important to us is that we don't have the luxury of a lot of local higher level care, especially for pediatrics. We can see for trauma centers, we only have 4 level 2 and 3 level 3 trauma centers in the whole state. No level 1s, the closest ones to us are Seattle, Salt Lake City, and Denver. We also have no burn centers and arguably no really strong dedicated pediatric centers, although there is some work in that direction. So what all this means is that we have to be able to provide the best care possible with the resources we have, because we know that moving patients to higher levels of care, especially outside of the state, is time consuming, it's costly, and very hard on the families and the patients. So we're hoping that with PECs and all of the support that they can bring, that we'll be able to provide as high a level of care locally as possible. So during the PEC Learning Collaborative, this was our team members on that group. I was the team lead. Robin Souzer is our state EMSC program manager. Then we actually had a local kind of rural PEC on the team. Dale Perrin was our former hospital preparedness program coordinator. And then we also roped in one of our epidemiologists and some folks from our EMS system, obviously, the manager, Sherry Graham, and the licensing program coordinator, Francine Janik, all of which were very strong team members. And we really appreciate all their help. So part of the conference and some of the things that we had to explain to folks throughout that 6-month learning collaborative was, what is a PEC? Now, early in the collaborative, we were distributed this description, this definition of a PEC. We pushed that out to our EMS agencies and did not get a lot of great feedback, in that it really can seem overwhelming, such a long list, especially when considering that Montana's EMS providers are 85% volunteer. So we had to look and back off of this large definition early in the collaborative to make it a little more doable. So as we moved into the collaborative and through the conferences that we were using to support our PECs, we pared the definition of a PEC down greatly. We really wanted to focus in this initial period, which we still have not moved past since, especially due to COVID, but we pared our definition in Montana of a PEC down to a person or people who, number one, ensure that their agency has the right equipment and supplies to care for kids, and that they coordinate, while not necessarily individually providing, the requisite pediatric education for that agency. So as we started to look at the training conferences that we wanted to offer to our PECs, we knew that we'd have to break them up geographically, because it was late winter, very early spring when these were coming up, and we knew that folks couldn't and or wouldn't travel too far, especially that time of year with Montana roads. So we had a little brainstorming session, asked for a bunch of input, and these are some of the things that we got back as far as where and when we should consider holding the conference. there was some consideration of splitting it up and offering different conferences, some on weekdays, some on weekends, to be able to capture both volunteer and paid providers. We wanted to be able to provide reimbursement for travel and expenses, to take the burden again, especially off of those folks that volunteer their time. Since we're Montana and definitely rural and agricultural, it was recommended that we stay away from calving season, spring ag work, big school events, graduations, etc. And anyone who's had to schedule anything like this knows how challenging all those can be. There was one strong recommendation that we make the conferences on Saturdays and kind of mid-morning to mid-afternoon, that would allow for some shorter kind of regional travel, keeping that time dedication to one day. One thing that we definitely found was quite beneficial in the overall recruitment and training of our PECs was offering some incentives. So we had, as you can see, a number of different recommendations as far as how we could incentivize participation in the conferences, and we'll show you here in a bit what we finally decided on. But we looked at incentives as far as helping drive the numbers we need to meet our performance measures for EMSC, which ended up working out pretty well for us. Again, more rural stuff. We decided that it would be a good idea to pick a good place with shopping availability for those rural folks that don't, quote unquote, make it to town as much, kind of increasing the bang for the buck sort of idea. For those folks, obviously, there were an EMS, which was our focus through the collaborative, making sure that we're able to offer continuing credit, continuing education credit hours. And definitely we knew that use of some of our simulation capabilities and equipment would be a draw. So we decided to implement some of that as well. So we knew that we had to have everything done by the end of March. We scheduled one early in March, and obviously Montana weather kicked in and things looked like this in March, so we had to cancel it. Our conferences ended up being 3 Saturdays in a row, roughly from 10 to 2. And just to give you some idea, I clocked mileage. I ended up driving over 1,100 miles to make those 3 conferences happen based on the geography of the state. But again, we chose the 3 sites, Missoula on the left, Billings on the bottom right, and Great Falls in the top center, as kind of regional areas that would be as easy as possible for folks to travel to. When we put together the conference agenda, we tried to pull in a lot of things that would have value for folks and make them feel more comfortable with their role as a PEC. So we opened the doors, started registration and things about 9:30, technically began the conference itself at 10, welcomed everyone, the normal introductions, etc. And Robin Souser, our EMSC program director, provided an overview of the Montana EMSC program, and she presented a lot of the resources that are available to hospitals, EMS agencies, et cetera, throughout the state through our EMSC program. Anyone who knows Robin knows that she is a paper person, so there were multiple ream boxes of all sorts of handouts and studies and educational opportunities and references. It really was very beneficial, and unsurprisingly, the ream boxes were empty by the time we were done with the conferences. So some of the things that we handed out were copies of the Engage, Calm, Distract toolkit. This was put together by the Public Health Department out of Colorado, and if you're not familiar with it, we'll provide you access to the resources that we talk about at the end. But Engage, Calm, Distract is a relatively concise toolkit that gives providers tools to manage the stress of dealing with ill or injured children. And it also, and on the whole idea of family-centered care, takes into account how we might help parents and other caregivers manage the stress and things of these situations as well. So very, very popular tool there put together by a friend of mine in Colorado. So like I said, well, if you're not familiar, we'll give you access to a lot of these at the end. Robin also shared information on a program that we have it through the EMSC program, where we have training materials that we can lend out to help make training at each individual agency level easier. So we have everything from IO mannequins to labor and delivery sort of mannequin, a special needs mannequin. So we try to drive these around or kind of courier them around within our agencies. But sometimes we just end up kind of FedExing them to folks are able to use the form that we see here to request some of those, give us the date and time, et cetera, and we'll get them the equipment they need for their training. So just a couple ideas of some of the resources that we shared early in the conference to just try to empower folks and to show that we weren't asking folks to take on another role or wear another hat without trying our best to provide a lot of really strong resources to help them out. Then we went into a short overview of the PEC Learning Collaborative. We wanted everyone to know what the collaborative was about, where we were coming from, and our direction in our PEC program. And as we finished up that overview, we asked for feedback and got some decent feedback on the program and folks' experience in becoming PECs, because the folks that came to the conference had agreed to become PECs, and many of them had already started to work on equipment and training as we had asked. So some feedback from them was quite valuable in our process that will allow us to make some necessary changes as we move forward. We then provided lunch, understanding that the mantra of if you feed them, they will come. So we typically just bought a bunch of great pizzas, and while folks ate, then we discussed a little more of our recruitment methods and just elicited a lot more feedback from the PECs that had gathered. One of the big and consistent bits of feedback that we got was requests for some information sharing portal, and more so than the cloud folder that will give you all access to, but they wanted more of a social interactive platform as well. So we decided, based on that feedback, just to create a PEC Facebook page. We started it out as a closed group, but what that meant was folks that were part of the group could not necessarily forward or share posts from the closed group out to their own Facebook pages, whether they be personal or their agency page, et cetera. So we finally ended up just opening that up. It allows folks to interact on the social platform. It allows us to share a lot of resources that we find ourselves, and honestly, many of them are just forwards of information that Pat Frost has sent out, but it is just one more way for us to share information and support within our PEC network. We also tried to use the conferences to reinforce some of the initiatives that we've been working on, and one of them we know that's a national push, is definitely something that we have been pushing in Montana as well, is the safe transport of pediatric patients by EMS. So we did a pediatric restraint overview presentation and then had demonstrations. We had actual ambulance cots, a number of different restraint devices. We went through the Furno PD Mate, the Furno Neo Mate. We introduced them to the Live Action Safety PD Life, which still blows my mind. I'm not sure how it is a viable product on the market, because it is nearly exactly a blue Furno PD Mate. So how they get around the copyrights and things like that, I don't know. But it seems to be as good a quality product as the Furno one at a fraction of the cost. And finally, the last one that we went through was the Quantum EMS ACR4, or Ambulance Child Restraint 4. Obviously, as an EMSC program, we don't necessarily promote one over the other, but when I was able to secure a little bit of grant funding, we did choose to provide a certain number of EMS agencies with the ACR4 based on the fact that it meets all of the recommendations of an ambulance child restraint. Roughly 4 or 5 pounds up to 100 pounds. It also seems to pack in a relatively small footprint to store in the ambulance, et cetera. So we went through and showed folks how to use all of these devices correctly. And in Great Falls, we were actually lucky enough to have a real live baby, and mom and baby were willing to let us try out the child restraints with the real life kiddo, which is somewhat of a rarity for most of us. So we appreciated that opportunity and made that conference a lot more fun. So after we went through the restraint overview and demonstration, we went into the whole idea of simulation-based training. We, as a state, have been the recipient of a lot of Helmsley grant funding, and we have 3 high-resolution human patient simulator trucks that are able to travel the state and provide some incredible simulation-based training, not actually in situ in their facilities, but bringing a good quality simulation experience to their locations at least. As the pediatric liaison, the state's provided me with a layered all-sim baby, kind of any more maybe medium fidelity simulator, but it allows me to be another resource to travel and provide simulation-based education. And to some degree, we'll do that in situ. We'll bring in and deploy the simulator in their emergency room on one of their 4 beds, et cetera, which allows us some greater capabilities to test their specific processes, down to the point that one common request I get is to just run a pediatric trauma or maybe a pediatric cardiac arrest in one of the rooms that they designate as a pediatric care area to ensure that their staff can find the appropriately sized equipment, et cetera. So it isn't always about simulating and testing their ability to provide care. It can be something as simple as testing folks' ability to locate the correct equipment they have. So with that background understanding of simulation capability in Montana, we know that not everyone is going to have immediate access to either of those 2 programs to bring simulation into their facilities or agencies. So we have looked at other ways for individual agencies or hospitals, et cetera, to provide some level of simulation-based training themselves. So one way that we did that is we worked with the Kansas EMSC program. They were generous and allowed us to borrow their pediatric scenario guidebook. We looked through that, we added a scenario or 2 and kind of beefed it up for us a little bit. And then we've made that available to all our EMS agencies, hospitals, et cetera, so they don't have to come up with scenarios themselves. We tried to make this kind of a turnkey resource for them to be able to provide education for themselves within their facility or agency. So each scenario has, the full background, the vitals and updated vitals. We kind of broke it down where we give them a sample history, so an OPQRS history. Then for most of them, we have a little informational page that might explain some of the specific characteristics about the scenario and the malady that was being simulated. And before we deployed this resource, I went through and built out what in the end looks like a national registry sort of scenario checkoff or competency form. If agencies or facilities wanted to use these scenarios for competency testing or just tracking capabilities, we wanted to give them some way to document that. So by handing them this resource, we hoped that whether they had a CPR mannequin or some sort of higher fidelity simulator, we would make it as easy as possible for them to provide themselves some simulation-based education to better prepare their staff and to check off some of the requirements for being a PEC, which we're hoping then again would lead to agencies choosing to become pediatric recognized by meeting a few other requirements 4 different levels for EMS agencies across the state. The other thing that we covered was not just giving them the scenario, but we discussed the whole idea of appropriately evaluating and giving feedback and things like that during the scenarios. So I'll just run through really quickly some of that short presentation that we provided, because it's not, we've decided it was not enough just to give them some scenarios and expect them to come out with some great appropriate learning. There's the whole idea of feedback and things like that we wanted them to be a little more comfortable with as well. So we started, as many debriefing trainings go, with the basic assumption from the Center for Medical Simulation. Everyone participating in training is intelligent, capable, does their best, and wants to improve. So there was not a great understanding, we knew, between debriefing and feedback, and we really wanted to steer our PECs, those that would be interested in providing some of this training, towards doing good solid debriefing. So by definition, we started to break those down, and we know that feedback is specific information given regarding an observed performance to help students identify areas for improvement. Now, that's something that we all want. It's valuable, and we don't want to poo-poo that idea. But we know that feedback, again, generally is a one-way conversation that is probably not as helpful in the long run as true debriefing. Feedback, again, provides information about performance with the intent to modify thinking or behavior to improve performance in the future, which sounds great, but many folks can kind of rankle at the one-way approach that feedback provides. So what we tried to impress on our PECs was the idea of debriefing, getting a little bit deeper, using discussion and reflection to help integrate new knowledge more thoroughly and permanently, hopefully, in the folks that they're working with. We know that debriefing is bi-directional and involves some reflective discussion, not just a proscriptive, this is what you need to do better sort of thing. We know that debriefing should ideally be a conversation between 2 people or more people if we're working in a group. We want the participants to reflect on and analyze their actions, their thought processes, a little bit on their psychomotor skills as well, but typically deeper than just that. And even to look at their emotional state to try to improve their overall performance rather than just physical psychomotor skills. We know that, and I'm sure that we've all probably experienced it from time to time, that judgmental approach can have definite detrimental effects. I know I've seen humiliation, reluctance, and hampered motivation, some training scars, and reticence to participate in future trainings. So following Walt Whitman's recommendation, we want to be curious and not judgmental. And those folks that have done true debriefing in the past understand that curiosity can be the basis of some really great interactions. What we really tried to push away from is the shame and blame sort of punitive style of feedback that so often happens in trainings, especially by those folks who don't do it professionally. We really tried to obviously promote the non-judgmental approach, but we understand that sometimes that can also leave students wondering how they really did. Did I do good? Did I do bad? Did I pass? Did I fail? So somewhere in the middle is where we need to find that happy medium to truly allow folks to leave the simulation feeling like it was worthwhile and they came away with something they can use to better their practice. So then we finally get to the idea of debriefing with good judgment. The non-judgmental approach is obviously avoid some topics, and they can give the impression that mistakes are bad and we don't want to talk about them, we don't want to reinforce mistakes, etc. debriefing with good judgment understands that, and we try to get past that. So in the end, we don't want to be too harsh or judgmental, but we don't want to sugarcoat and just pat people on the back and say thanks for coming out. Where this led us, and thankfully Dr. Mark Auerbach from Yale was a big part of the Tech Learning Collaborative. He introduced me to a debriefing tool called Pearls that was developed by some of his colleagues, promoting excellence and reflective learning in simulation. And if you're looking for a relatively easy debriefing tool, this resource will be available to you at the end as well. But it's available on the Debrief to Learn website as well. Relatively simple tool that we gave our folks a little bit of training on. We'll just kind of give you a quick overview here as well. But again, we wanted to give them a tool not only to be able to provide the training, but to provide good debriefing and then hopefully honest, real, meaningful learning. So the Pearls debriefing tool is can be at least summed up in a two-page kind of front and back tool that we see here. The front page that we'll break down, and then some additional information on the back page. So we run through our scenario, we complete that, and we step into the debriefing tool once we've kind of declared end X or end of exercise. So the debriefer is first going to set the scene and create a safe context for learning. The debriefing tool here gives us some recommended statements and things like that that make this easy. So the task associated with setting the scene is we want to state the goal of the debriefing, and we want to articulate the basic assumption, which the statement would go something like, let's spend 15 minutes debriefing. Our goal is to improve how we work together and care for our patients. And then again, that statement we always want to hang on to. Everyone here is intelligent and wants to improve. From there, we move on to reactions. We want to explore how the simulation made people feel. We can get to that sometimes by the way that a lot of us have done debriefing in the past, which was a question like, well, how did that go? And that may or may not get us where we want to go. It may be the long way around and may lead a little more towards feedback than debriefing. So what we're trying to do is solicit initial reactions and the emotions surrounding those, have people kind of self-identify starting at that point. So questions that we might ask are there any initial reactions, or how are you feeling? Not how did it go? Do you feel like you passed or failed, but how are you feeling? We can get a little deeper many times through questions like this. Once we have that bit of discussion with the participants, then we move on to the third phase, which is description, where we're going to clarify facts. Sometimes the participants may understand that things didn't go well. Sometimes they think they did great, when there really were some facts that need to be clarified and straightened out. So we'll clarify those facts in order to develop a shared understanding of the case, what the case was about, what was supposed to be going on, and from there we can see what we might need to improve on. So the statements that are recommended, something like, can you please share a short summary of the case? What was the working diagnosis? Does everyone agree? Sometimes what we think we're clearly presenting through a scenario may not be what the learner understands to be going on. Sometimes that could be a bit of a faulty scenario. Sometimes that could be that the person has just kind of missed the mark a little bit and not understood. But we try to tease those sorts of things out. After that discussion, we move into step 4, which is analysis, where we're exploring a variety of performance domains. And when we get to analysis, we flip over to the back side of the card. But before we do that, we're provided a preview statement. So that really this toolkit is very step-by-step and user-friendly. So as we move into the analysis phase, we'll say something like, at this point, I'd like to spend some time talking about blank because blank. So if we can understand someone's frame, what their thought process was, etc., This could be something that went very well. This could be something where we might need to, give some direction or education, etc. We're able to use the back of the sheet and figure out which approach is appropriate based on their performance. So first, we look at the performance domains. The analysis phase can explore any of these domains based on the debriefer's reaction to how the simulation went. We can look at and work on everything from decision making to teamwork to resource utilization, etc. So the three approaches in the analysis phase, we can start with learner self-assessment. If we need to go a little deeper, we can do a focused facilitation. And if it's obvious that we need to just kind of step back and kind of teach or reteach something very specific, we can do that part 3, providing information. Again, we have sample phrases that should hopefully kickstart us into each of these sections, depending on which one we decide we need to do. So after that discussion, then we move to a mini summary. Thank everyone for the discussion, solicit additional comments, etc. And then move on to the application and summary. We want to identify the takeaways based on how the rest of the debriefing went. It needs to be very learner-centered and asking them for key takeaways. What did they learn? Because what the debriefer thinks they should have taken away may not be what they think they need to take away. And in the end, then, the instructor or the debriefer can kind of bring things back around and summarize the key learning points to make sure that everyone ended up on the same page. So we really liked that toolkit. Honestly, I'm not sure, as COVID kind of took the wind out of our sails with some of this, I'm not sure how many of our agencies have done a lot with this debriefing model, but it's definitely still available for them. So once we had gone through the simulation guidebook and the debriefing toolkit, we actually got out the Laerdal SimBaby and ran our PECs through a number of different scenarios. They really wanted training for themselves, which this provided, but we also tried to bring that back around and show that now that you've done this, could you use the scenario guidebook and be the instructor, be the debriefer yourselves? And had some discussion around moving from kind of the participant side to the instructor or debriefer side. Talked a little bit about incentives, and this is what we chose as an incentive for the agencies that sent their PEC or PECs to a conference. We found, and again, we're not necessarily advocating one piece of equipment over the other, but we got a great price on these. They were a Preston child CPR mannequin. They're 2019 AHA compliant, and that they give feedback, etc. We figured that with the huge push on high quality CPR, the movement towards pit crew CPR and all those things on the BLS side, we thought a CPR mannequin would be something we couldn't go wrong with. And then we thought that maybe it might give those agencies without other training equipment some patient analog to run some basic simulations out of the guidebook with, if they had nothing else. What we found was both during the collaborative, trying to get folks signed up, we incentivized that with boxes of pediatric equipment. And then in order to get the mannequin, you had to come to the conference. So this double-tiered incentive program really brought some folks to the table that honestly I don't think would have become PECs or attended the conference without the kind of dangled carrot for them. But at the same time, like I mentioned before, we were kind of self-serving in choosing the incentives, in that we wanted to help agencies meet the performance measures that we need them to meet through use of the incentives. So we were providing the equipment that they should have, and then providing them the capability to do maybe a little bit more training than they had in the past. Just since I had it in my slides, I'll give you our lessons learned from the whole collaborative right here before we stop and have any discussion. But what we found, I think there were 8 kind of bullet pointed lessons learned that we picked out. We found that a multidisciplinary team with varying backgrounds, when we're especially setting up our PEC program and doing our recruiting, folks from different geographic regions, different work and other backgrounds, et cetera, we found was very, very important. We also discovered that we created a lot of confusion and probably lost a few agencies before we really clearly settled on the Montana definition of a PEC. So I would recommend, if you're starting from scratch, define what that's going to be for your program or your state and keep that consistent. And also definitely we found that keeping it manageable based on the providers that we're asking to participate in the program is important. We want to make sure that the team and the program itself is well introduced. Since I'm not a state employee, I have a non-state email address. So as the project coordinator, I was emailing agencies, calling agencies, et cetera. My emails went to the email round folder. Folks ignored my calls thinking I was trying to sell them vehicle warranties, et cetera. So communication early on was difficult since folks were not expecting those sorts of contacts, especially from me, who at least some of the agencies were not overly familiar with. Again, on communication, we found that we needed to use as many different types of communication as possible. Email and phone calls worked for the majority, but I was able to recruit one PEC via Facebook Messenger. I had one agency that refused to take my call or have any conversations, but another team member had a personal connection with that agency and was able to recruit a PEC there. So different people, different communication platforms, et cetera, we found to be very valuable. We then found that PECs wanted something official. We know that we like in EMS, we like badges, we like ID cards, we like patches, we want something that says we're official. We had folks that after they had attended the conference, actually on their signature lines in their emails would put PEC as another credential after their name. So what we wanted to do is give them some checkbox to make it official that yes, they are a PEC. And what we did was to very clearly state the expectation that an agency would be recognized as having a PEC after they completed a survey that we used to gather data to drive our program and to gather information necessary to the program. So once they completed the survey, I sent them an email saying, yes, this is it, you're now a PEC. And for a lot of folks that was a bigger deal than I had anticipated. Again, just to touch on incentives, I think we got some of the participation and attention we got throughout the program by incentivizing folks and their participation. And again, double duty, those incentives helping us maybe meet our performance measures and truly help folks become more pediatric prepared. So that worked out very well. We definitely used our participation in a PEC Learning Collaborative, and we continue to leverage this sort of symbiotic relationship in that agencies that were interested in having a PEC, once they had established a PEC, well, now they were generally ready for a higher level of recognition as an agency being pediatric prepared. So some folks that established PECs in their agencies went on to check a few more boxes and become actually recognized as a pediatric prepared EMS service. On the other side of things, those agencies that were interested in or had already previously become recognized as pediatric prepared at the agency level decided to add PECs in order to, again, get to that next level of certification or recognition. So the similar initiatives supporting and leveraging into each other was great. And finally, I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was, but PECs, those folks that were had designated themselves as PECs, were incredibly, insatiably hungry for training on their new responsibilities. So had we not been planning this set of conferences, I think we would have been prompted to do something similar anyway, just due to the fact that these were motivated folks that wanted to do the best they could and were itching for that training and preparedness sort of thing in order to go out and do their job. As far as sustainability, that's something we looked at as we thought through the conferences and then looking forward from that. We definitely have tried to leverage a lot of peer-to-peer promotion of the program. The Facebook group for PECs that we built has been a great way to share information. We do have pediatric liaison work group that has periodic meetings to look for opportunities and gaps and things like that. The EMSC program does our best to push out refresher trainings, not only EMS refresher trainings kind of traditionally for recertification, but training throughout the state as requested in order to try to keep that baseline pediatric capability present and vibrant. Over the past number of years, we would hold a spring tabletop exercise series. The Tragic School Bus was the name of the series. We did 2 or 3 years on a pediatric-based mass casualty tabletop exercise that brought together agencies and facilities from across the state because, as I'm sure most folks know, and it's probably the same in your state, what one region of the state would do with XYZ problem might be managed with a totally different approach in a different area of the state. So kind of sharing and melding those ideas from different geographic areas, different medical directors, et cetera, has been very popular and productive for us. The ACR4 project, I continue to look for grant funding to put more pediatric child restraints on ambulances. And then as funding has started to dry up, it's been more difficult, but we do continue to look for continuing incentives to keep people's attention and enthusiasm for the program. All right, so that was probably my long-winded explanation of how we did our initial round of PEC conferences. As we said before, COVID has really kind of derailed a lot of things for everyone nationwide, but there's the possibility that we would, if we have the ability and the funding, run these conferences on a somewhat regular basis, annually or whatever we might be able to sustain. But they definitely had a lot of benefit, everything from some training and information sharing down to just that networking of folks that with similar interest in caring for peds. On the slide right here is my contact information, my email, my phone number. If you're a QR code person, you can scan that QR code and that will lead you to a OneDrive cloud folder. It's one of our repositories of a lot of our pediatric resources. So our version of the pediatric scenario guidebook is there, Engage, Calm, Distract is there, samples of our equipment checkout forms, and a lot of things that we referenced earlier on, plus a lot more. We're happy to share those resources, and other folks have resources they'd love to share for us to put in that folder. We would love to have that as well. I'll exit out of this now. I'll give you maybe another couple seconds to get any information you want up there. And then I'll put the actual web link into the chat that will get you to that cloud folder as well, if the QR code is not your thing. So with that, I will stop talking and thank everyone for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was a lot of really great information. I'll just open up the floor for these last few minutes to see if anybody has any questions for you or want to clarify anything that the Montana program did or provide any ideas that you may have done in your state. It'd be great to hear from you. And in case anybody missed the chat, Rachel Ford mentioned that they asked NHTSA, their Oregon Department of Transportation with NHTSA funds to provide some money to purchase some for no PD mates as well. And they did provide that money and they were able to give 93 out. So just another idea of where you might be able to find funding sources for that sort of thing. Radio silence, that mean no questions or comments?
Everyone should have that. Oh, good God, I somehow sent it to just Morgan Skates. I'm sorry. I will repost that link to everyone as far as the cloud folder. So here we go.
Jason questioned whether or not Montana has been doing any video conferencing or presentations with the state being so large.
We definitely do. In fact, just like everyone else through COVID, our EMSC meetings and pretty much everything else has been pushed to that virtual realm. We know that it isn't always as beneficial, but definitely both due to geography and then COVID restrictions, we've still been able to get a lot of good work done. So yeah, definitely something that we have used and most likely will continue to use.
I also just want to quickly point out, I'll put the link in the chat box. Back in May of last year, during the PEC Community of Practice, it was the May 15th session, and that link goes to the archive. It was Kentucky and Montana presenting, and the Montana presentation, I can't remember, Jason, if you presented there, but I do remember also that one of your PECs presented about one of the learning sessions that you did. And so people might want to go back and look at that one as well, to see a little bit more in depth about an individual. It might have been the Great Falls one.
It could be, and we definitely presented, I don't even remember which group it was for, but I presented along with one of my PECs who presented her perspective from the PEC role and pulling in resources and some of the things she did in her agency.
Yes, yep, that was it. Yeah, and so it was, yeah, there was some information provided on what she took from the learning session and then took to her agency.
Absolutely. I think that's in that cloud folder, but if not, I'll make sure as soon as we're done that I'll put that presentation that we put together there. So it was a lot of what we just presented with the addition of her her perspective, which was very valuable.
Yeah, I think it was, because there were lots of questions during that about what she used. And so I think you did post them in there. All right, well, there are no questions. We don't have to sit here. We can give you 3 more minutes back to your day. Again, Jason, thank you so much. And especially thanks for taking a break out of your time down there in sunny Orlando. I hope you were soaking up the sun, although it was 70 here yesterday, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah, no, it's been about as warm in Montana as it's been in Orlando, which is just crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. Anyway, yeah, so everybody go ahead and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again so much for joining. Oh, Jason, would you mind sending me these slides so we could post them to the PWDC website?
Absolutely, I'll do that right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.